Okay, so welcome everybody to the East-West Psychology Annual Student Symposium. Today is the first of 2 days, and we will, without further ado, begin. Our first speaker is Anshul Aggarwal, and his talk is called The Philosophy and Practice of Integral Agriculture.
Thank you, Debashish. It's great to see everyone. Um, I will be sharing with you today about what I have come to call integral agriculture. And this is the topic of my research, which I will formally start this fall. So one of the intentions to share this today is also to invite suggestions and comments as I begin formulating these ideas and this research. Um, I've been farming for over a decade in different parts of India, and finally now settled in Auroville, which is a small town on the southeast coast of India. This research is a continuation of my effort in trying to understand our relationships with land, society, and self, and how all that changes who we are and what we are to become in this rapidly changing world. When I say a rapidly changing world, I also mean a rapidly deteriorating world. We are confronted by one crisis after another in all levels of existence, ecology, society, politics, economics, individual, and psychological. The line that you see on the screen is the graph over time of our biodiversity, our trust in institutions, the quality of education, despite increased literacy rates, water quality, air quality, food quality, quality of relationships, intimacy, overall health, human fertility rates, mental well-being, etc., etc., etc. And one of these crises that seem to be worsening despite all our efforts to solve it is world hunger. Today, 1 out of 7 people in the world doesn't have access to food. They starve and are undernourished. Um, Studies show that in the next 50 years, global food production needs to be doubled to feed the world population. What studies also show is that 1 out of 7 people is also suffering from obesity and associated health issues. So while 1 billion people in the world are starving, another billion is consuming more food than they need to. So the problem of world hunger is not of lack of food. It's a problem of a culture of commodification of food, where access to food is solely dependent on money. And growing more food will not change that. And I'm not even talking about the quality of food or the kind of food that is available to the people who it is available to. I would be preaching to the choir if I go further into the need of a new food paradigm. But I do want to mention some questions that arise from our experience of these crises, particularly focusing on food as a central theme. I have discussed some of these questions in my previous symposium presentations, like what is to be born, what is to be human, and how these questions are fundamentally related to the questions of food. What kind of food would we eat in the coming decades? Who will grow our food in the coming decades? The question that I want to explore today is around the future practice of agriculture and how that relates to the idea of a human after human, the post-human. Um, then we can ask, what is post-human? What is the food of the post-human? What is the agriculture of the post-human? Before we begin to articulate the agriculture of the post-human, let's understand better agriculture itself. Archaeological evidence shows that agriculture started some 10,000 years ago with what the archaeologists call the Neolithic Revolution. Before that, we lived as hunters and gatherers, moving from place to place in search of food, much like other animals. Um, and like domesticating fire, which is believed to have been around 2 million years ago, the domestication of land, plants, and some animals in the form of agriculture marks a very definitive step in human evolution, almost a kind of a psychological revolution a graduation from wilderness, stepping out from a complete dependence on nature, from sustenance to establishing an active relationship with nature's rhythms for the furtherance of human civilization. I'm tempted to view this shift as a kind of individuation of humanity from the natural collective consciousness. Humanity separating itself from wilderness to explore its potential. We may call this aspect of humanity as Homo agricola, man the farmer, or the term that I prefer, man the cultivator. While we recognize the implications of Homo faber, man the maker, particularly due to Bergson's work, the philosophy of Homo agricola remains under researched. In the last 10,000 years, Homo agricola developed through a deep engagement with nature. Even after the individuation, the relationship was not severed. Food, which was considered a gift from nature, then became also a fruit of human labor, the offering of the farmer to the land, to each other, and as we will see, to the gods. There are hundreds of stories from indigenous cultures about the sacredness of land and the intimate relationship these cultures had with food. For example, the Santal people, who are one of the largest indigenous groups of India, rice is a sacred gift from the sky gods, which brings their community together and nourishes and sustains them. Um, they perform rituals where they enact cycles of loss, death, and rebirth, reinforcing central food, the food as a central principle of life, of individual and community life. On the other side of the world, we have the Arhuaco people in North Colombia who believe that humans are born from corn seeds that fall from the sky. For them, human fertility is intimately connected to the fertility of the land, and both are seen as nature's gifts to create, grow, and sustain life. In both these examples and in many others, food is seen as a bridge between the gods and the human, between heaven and earth, between the spiritual and the material world. We will find a similar trope in the Indian Vedic tradition, where food offerings and sacrifices into the holy fire are a way of bridging the gap between man and God. The idea of food, the similar idea of food continues into the Indian Upanishadic tradition as well, where it is called Annam. The verse in Taittiriya Upanishad says, all beings are born of food, live by food, and finally return into food. Therefore, it is called Annam. So Annam is not only food. Here, all beings are called Annam. And as Sri Aurobindo notes, and I quote, all matter according to the Upanishads is food, and this is the formula of the material world, that the eater eating is himself eaten. So it is interesting, firstly, to see all matter and living existence as food. And secondly, to associate birth, sustenance, and death with food. Matter being reborn as matter and dying into matter as food. There's another powerful Indian myth around food involving Shiva and Parvati. The story goes that once Shiva emphasized the primacy of consciousness and challenged the need for all material things, including food, Parvati, in order to prove to Shiva that food was essential, disappeared, creating a state of famine and leaving both humans and gods in suffering. Moved by compassion, then she, of course, reappears in the form of Annapurni, meaning full of food. Or as we've just seen about the meaning of the word Annam, it would also mean embodying matter in its fullness. Here in this image, Shiva is seen begging for food from the goddess Annapurna, and the crowned goddess spoons nourishment into Shiva's bowl. It's quite a stunning sight, visually, psychologically, and spiritually. Parvati offering food to Shiva, matter and spirit united back by food. In the Catholic traditions too, we have, we find connections between food and the materiality of this life and body. Here, for instance, in the scene of the Last Supper and verses 26 to 28 in Matthew 26, it is said, and as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink you all of it, for this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins." These passages become the biblical foundation for the Christian Eucharist, in which the bread and wine are still taken to be the body and blood of Christ. So, food here is nothing but the body of God. Um, and there is a sense of sacrifice of the body as redemption. This is an interesting idea, that of sacrifice. We've been looking at how there's a sacrifice of the divinity into the material world, the sacrifice of the rice and the corn seeds, their fall from the heaven to become human, the sacrifice of food itself to be born as all beings, the sacrifice of all beings to return back to food, food as redemption, a kind of seeking for something beyond what we are, which is then opening up new possibilities of who we can be. But if we become something else, how does that change our relationship to food, to body, and to matter? Here, Sri Aurobindo offers an important insight on how instincts will be transformed as human consciousness advances. The desire for food, he says, has to progress from the type of a mutually devouring hunger to the type of a mutual giving, of an increasingly joyous sacrifice of interchange. The individual gives himself to other individuals and receives them back in exchange. The lower gives itself to the higher, and the higher to the lower, so that they may be fulfilled in each other. The human gives itself to the divine, and the divine to the human. The all in the individual gives itself to the all in the universe and receives its realized universality as a divine recompense. Thus, the law of hunger must give place progressively to the law of love, the law of division to the law of unity, the law of death to the law of immortality. I find this beautiful. The law of hunger giving place progressively to the law of love. This has profound implications for our times if we reflect on our entire paradigm founded on the law of hunger. And as a farmer, I'm compelled to ask, can we imagine an agriculture that is not constructed around the satisfaction of hunger, but on cultivation of love, progress, and unity? And we have examples in history that show us that agriculture has this potential. From Vedic India in the east to Egypt in the west, agricultural civilizations have given us profound wisdom and shown us examples of contemplative cultures. We also have in our contemporary times the experience of the indigenous communities from across the world, which live in a deep communion with nature and reflect a wisdom of relationality that challenges the limited idea of human. Given the state of the world and our post human concerns, this research then explores what kind of agriculture can apply this wisdom and help us work towards a law of love, towards overcoming physical death through spiritual immortality. In this regard, I would call agriculture a technology of the self, to use Foucault's term, that also operates in the social and ecological domains. And now I must clarify what I mean by agriculture in the first place. Agriculture comes from the Greek agros and cultura. Agros or agrum in Greek means field, land, and cultura means to grow, to cultivate. So agriculture literally means the cultivation of land. But cultura is also the root word for culture. And that would give us a much broader definition of agriculture, which is a culture that springs forth from working on the land, from the relationships of human with land, food, body, and matter. Um, so if we take food and body as devices of relationality between the material and the spiritual worlds, agriculture becomes much more than just the act of growing food. It becomes an entire system, an ecological, social, and psycho-spiritual system that emerges around the cultivation of land. This understanding of agriculture is what I call integral agriculture, and the research is on articulating its philosophy and practice. In this vision of integral agriculture, Growing food is not just about producing a commodity that sustains human body. It is a vehicle of education, evolution, and transformation of the land, the society, and of self. The meaning of integral here is borrowed from the work of Sri Aurobindo and Mother, which is not about a summation of everything, but a wide embrace and integrating all parts of human existence into a meaningful whole, a harmonious unity. An integral agriculture would then address the concerns of food, of the body's nature and potential, both the individual as well as the collective social and ecological body. I have identified ecological, social, and psychospiritual as its main aspects. So, whatever I've shared so far is the philosophical foundation of this research. And while I have been practicing it in limited and different ways in my work as a farmer, I have not articulated this practice in this language. We are far from realizing any of this, and that keeps me from making any claims on whether or not what we do is any different. Um, and therefore, I feel this research is important to uncover what the implications of this practice can be. One of the things that I realized while formulating this research is that even the method of this research needs to be quite broad to be able to consider all aspects of agriculture that I've just shared. It's almost like creating a new framework, a new language of integral research first. So I took the lens of integral education, which most of you here might be familiar with, and I won't go too much into detail about that. And I took that integral education lens and I mapped it to the aspects of integral agriculture. Um, and this intersection gives us some really interesting lines of inquiries, all quite unique and rich. And that gives us a very solid starting point for this research. Um, yeah, I think I won't spend time going over these questions, but I'd be happy to share these questions for later for patient reading. So in conclusion, I'm looking at agriculture as a technology of transformation, food as a seed of that transformation, and humanity as a seed of something new emerging at the horizons of our current understanding of what being human is, a way to slowly moving from the law of hunger to the law of love. This takes us to the discussion of the post-human in the sense of post the paradigm of of human-centeredness, but also post the paradigm of human identity, opening it to new meanings and relationships. Agriculture, I feel, is extremely important in this conversation as it includes within it the entirety of ecological, social, and psychospiritual relationships, and can help us resolve not only our material hunger, but also our spiritual hunger. It could become a culture of mutual giving, as Sri Aurobindo said, or a mutual sacrifice. Um, the divine sacrificing itself as food for us, the land sacrificing itself as food for us, the farmer sacrificing their body and life as food, we ourselves sacrificing, hopefully, our body and life as food to the divine towards a new future. And food takes a central role in our journey to this future of the post-human. The philosophy of integral agriculture recognizes this and informs a new practice of cultivating food and our spiritual aspirations. Finally, if we are what we eat, we will be what we will eat. Or we can say, what must we eat if we are to become something beyond what we are? This is the question that I'd like to leave you with. So thank you for listening patiently. And I think I've kept my time.
Thank you so much, Anshul. You've kept your time, and maybe we have time for one question. If anybody wants to field a quick question before we continue. ML, yes, please.
Yes, thank you for this. What caught my attention is our relationship, the word hunger and moving from hunger to love. And I was wondering what you had in mind for exploring our hunger, because in the West, I don't think we stay with our hunger. We move immediately to grasp food to get away from the hunger. So to me, it would be a very interesting and intimate exploration to understand our hunger and be with it. So just what were you thinking in this line of inquiry?
Yeah, thanks, Meg. I think you know the idea of hunger also comes from an idea of lack, an idea of separation, and love on the other hand is this idea of relationship, of connectedness. So just philosophically, I think it's understanding what are the boundaries between uh, the sense of separation that we have and the sense of connectedness that we have, and how do we sort of balance that life, this dual life that we live anyway. In practical terms, I don't know. And I think that's what I'm really taking on this research for. Like, what does it all mean in practical terms? Are we not going to eat in the next 100 years, 200 years? I don't think so. What kind of food are we going to eat? I don't know. Or are we all going to just live on love? So I don't know. I mean, these are the questions that I also have, and that's what I'm sort of planning to take on.
Thank you so much, Anshul. I think it's a rich topic for research, and we might have occasion to discuss this further if we have a chance at the end. So we move on to the second speaker. And the second speaker is Joseph Johnson. And Joseph's talk title is The Rights of Future Generations, Second Wave Modernism.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. That was a great presentation. Thank you, Debashish, and everybody for being here today. So this presentation is on the rights of inheritance of future generations. I'm going to kind of go through the slides quickly. The objective is to conduct an innovative, multicultural, longitudinal, psychophysiological, observational, study of intergenerational wellness for the disenfranchised through a retreat center in nature and establish rights of future generations. So that's a mouthful. So the overview is we're in a state of crisis right now, is what I'm posing in terms of depression, anxiety, isolation, health issues like diabetes, preventable illnesses. And so I'm proposing a solution inspired by the Iroquois people of Native American background of the 7 generational approach of basically saying everything that you do today, keep in mind how it could benefit somebody 7 generations from now. We live in a society that's very fast paced and very instant gratification based. And so I want to conduct a 150-year study. It's also inspired by the Harvard study on happiness and establishing both a retreat center where people can go that are experiencing anxiety and use time-tested approaches to healing like meditation and just looking at practices from other cultures and also establishing rights for future generations that can make it easier for them to function in this modern day, which is why it's called second wave modernism. And so just briefly, this started from Dark Night of My Soul. I went through a whole bunch of problems, car accident, suicidality, eventually stumbled upon the Yoga Sutras and the Book of Joy that was very life-changing for me. And I started looking at the world very differently. I apologize for going through the slides a little quickly. But essentially, I started reimagining and redefining what success in health meant. So growing up, I embarrassed to say, right? But just to be honest, I grew up around, it was normal to have liquor stores with alcohol and cigarettes everywhere. This is what people use for healing. Fast food restaurants, there were drug dealers, there were food deserts. When I went to my master's program, much more affluent area, there were gyms, right? There were professional masseuses, counseling sessions, piano rooms, yoga classes. So I realized that there was a whole different world of health out there. And seeing how ideas like in the Book of Joy Archbishop Desmond Tutu, may he rest in peace, pushed ideas forward of emphasizing that we're weak and fragile and leaning towards that. Really changed my perspective. And then obviously looking at things from a fractal level, you really see how weak and fragile we are, right? I mean, anything in the universe can topple us over. We're really puny. And so just transitioning into the rights of inheritance. So these are again rights that we're hoping in the context of this climate of this cultural war, right? Particularly in America, you have a lot of adults that have a lot of bleakness to them, and it's seen in the children. I work with a lot of youth, right, like in juvenile hall and things of this nature, and they're inheriting that this goal of trying to give them new things to aspire towards, right? That can over generations make things better for us. So one is the right of inheriting technology that does not destroy our bodies, minds, and souls. You hear a lot of adults talking about the effects of technology, and yet we're upset when children experience the same things. This is something that we should be able to address over time. It's very doable, right? Essentially, what we can say, I called it the fifth consciousness. That's been debated over whether or not that's a good term. But there's this consciousness that we go into when we're on the internet for a long time that's different than meditation. It's different than hallucination. It's different than dream state. It's a certain state, a certain trance state that we're in. While in that state, we risk distorting reality. Um, where you have phrases that I've heard from young people like, if it's not a Snapchat, it didn't happen, right? Believing events in societies events in society are more real if they see it online than just their day-to-day interaction. Having distorted looks of views on friendships and just spending longer periods in isolation. And so yeah, that's one. Another right is the youth have a right to inherit realistic expectations and goals based on realities and not perfectionism. And that's a huge issue, right? I have a quote from the Dalai Lama about that. I'm just going to kind of skip over, but essentially saying that stress and anxiety seems to be a big cause of our problems in society. Um, and it gives us unrealistic goals to reach. Nowadays, we can receive literally an unlimited number of correspondences all at the same time, and it is increasingly socially inappropriate for delayed responses. These are some things, right, that we should be able to figure out over the generations on how to help out future generations, right? This is a second wave modernism idea. Transhumanism, to be honest, is a very new concept to me, introduced in a course that I was taking this semester. But from my understanding of it, this idea of technology making us better people, I think that it's not disastrous in itself, but mixed with capitalism, it actually can put us in a body overload. And so what we see is, I don't know why I have this video, just see if I can briefly show it. It's just a picture of how the neurons function, right? I know it's really fast, but I think that there's this notion that people have that like we're just like this computer and that we can just do an infinite number of things where we're expected to be multitaskers, strong on time. It's unrealistic, right? And we're encouraging kids to be a master of all trades, and it's just causing them stress, right? We also have a rise in unrealistic body standards, and that's causing for a rise. I know I go to the gym a lot, and men using steroids almost normalized, and you know, breast implants, things of this nature. Trying to keep up with the expectations of perfectionism, right? And so we have to ask at some point, like, what is the end goal? Was that is the dream to be like this, right? And then there's self-induced brainwashing, which I could go into at a later time if somebody has questions about it. I'm sliding through, just trying to be mindful of time. So essentially, we need to have periods of tech detox. We're going to have to prepare future generations for how to deal with the overload of increasing speed of technology over time, right? That would be a really healthy thing to do for future generations. Another thing is you should have a right of inheriting benevolent language and safe language for socializing with other people in the community. You find it increasingly harder to talk to people from different backgrounds, even with the attempt to to fix that. I believe that's because there's a lot of untangleable knots and unforgivable offenses in our country that lead to social and intellectual analysis paralysis and encourages the skyrocketing of unprocessed materials to remain in the shadow of the individual and collective psyche. I hope I'm doing okay on time. And so we have this culture war that we're dealing with all the time, as we're all aware of. And I'm saying that in part, that's because we have a mounting backlog of societal problems that cannot be resolved within the space of scientific management, which is a concept started by, some people may know, Friedrich Taylor, the father of scientific management, where he learned how to make everything more efficient for factories during the industrial period. It's an obsession that we have in our country, and we really need to address it. And so trying to look at visions for ending the culture wars, right? In my humble estimation, the attempt to bridge intersectional divides has been more of a failure than a success. And so, in short, as being a counselor, as growing up in this country, what I've noticed is that we have a lot of negative terms that we attribute to people, even when we're trying to be friendly, and a lot of, or we often will spill out stereotypes about people based on their demographic background, which creates tension. And so I'm proposing an idea, again, apologize for going through the slides so quickly, of trying to develop cognitive function terminologies as a way of introducing oneself or observing a person, or relating to other people before demographics, because I'm saying that it's a abject failure, right? And that this would actually get us closer to answer the famous quote from Dr. King of, "I will judge people not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And cognitive functions is a idea from psychological types from Carl Jung. And so just re-envisioning that like an ending to the cultural war instead of normalizing it, right? Another right is the right of inheriting adults with integrity, right? And so I have this, so this is a quote from an economist, Richard Wolff, and he says, "We live in a country that almost in a medieval, we live in a country that almost in a medieval way bifurcates the idea of good and evil, and everything is reduced to a story." And so I have this idea called the Malcolm X fallacy. The Malcolm X fallacy occurs when someone confidently makes an anti-intellectual disregard for an individual or group due to presuming them to be unworthy of learning about, based on their ethnicity, religion, gender, or other easily accessible signifiers. And so the solution for it is, if a person cannot give a fair and accurate account of a person or group's central beliefs or practices, then they do not have logical grounds for declaring them unworthy of learning about or declaring them good or evil. And this is a big problem in our country. Some brief examples are Carl Jung. We know in the East-West psychology program that we push him a lot. And I could say in many other environments, including high intellectual ones, people critique him heavily with no knowledge of him. That's not okay. Confucius, people misquote him all the time. He's foundational for Eastern Asia. Rap music, though in pop it's very bad, right? For a lot of reasons. Underground rap is extremely intellectual, and people don't give it a shot, or Black people in general, and a lot of colonized societies, right? And so deeming something bad or good essentially to expedite time, because they're agreeing or not agreeing with the colonial values, right? Like scientific revolution, capitalism, democracy, individualistic independence creates this, right? Where we say who is evil based on American values. And so you have a show out, which is a good show, right? Some people may know about it, about two people who fit the stereotype of, the things that I'm mentioning, and people applaud them, people cheer them, it doesn't create fear. Tupac, on the other hand, spent his whole life being a revolutionary and intellect. He actually has character but people still will instinctively see fear within him. And this is a symptom of the problem that the Malcolm X fallacy can resolve. So some benefits to doing this approach is it improves intercultural relationships. and counters the othering process. And we can reach more universally agreed upon heroes in our society. And it uses the intellect in a more healthy way. It unlocks different stereotypes, right? Yoga is more than just yoga pants. Um, uh, Martial arts is more than just kung fu movies, right? There's a lot of wisdom that we can get from it when we keep these oversimplified stereotypes. It really makes other ethnicities have a distaste for America, and it prevents us from learning the deeper wisdom. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, so I'm kind of flying through this. Um, Essentially, being more comfortable with saying the phrase, um, one thing that could help, let me slow down a little bit. I see I have 9 minutes. One thing that could help us is being more comfortable saying, I don't know. And almost having a beginner's mind, right? Which is something that I've heard a lot echoed through the professors through their school in the EWP program. I think that, truth be told, this is the answer to most people's questions nowadays, uh, because humans only have the capacity to know about a finite amount of things, right? Google and GPT can only do so much. Our neurons can only create new memories so quickly. And so we need to normalize that. Um, and so one of the ways that we see this being being an issue is when interacting with Black people, right? Black Americans. In modern day, it seems many races are expected to have unreasonable insight into the Black experience. And I'm calling it unreasonable primarily because Black people have not processed a lot of their experiences themselves imically, right? And so I'm proposing that there's a, for example, right, an IMIC study done where Black people can examine how successful were the Great Migrations, which briefly, right, was the movement for the first time in American history of African Americans in the millions from the South to the West, to the East, to the North in America. We have never, as a people, Black people, had an IMIC discussion about that. It's a huge issue, and a lot of people are expected to respond to it, and so allowing for spaces like that, but not just Black people, right? But we have homeless encampments, right, where doctors are and families are living outside. We can interview these people. We also can do this studying abroad in places where colonizations happened. I'm not saying that there hasn't been studies, but we could study deeper places like India, Brazil, the Caribbean islands, and Congo. And then we don't have to maintain this bravado of I know, I know, I know. Um, as I'm coming closer towards the end, you should have the right to ask existential questions, right? Transitioning from a closed society to an open society. And so I have a quote by Confucius. I'm just going to skip through, but I'm a big Confucian fan. Um, or I'll just read it. So basically, we need to promote, which I think is promoted through the EWP program, the teacher as a self-actualized healer or aspiring to be. So the quote is, the master said, do I have knowledge? I have no special knowledge. But if an uneducated fellow comes to me with a question, I attack it with all sincerity, exploring it from end to end until I've exhausted it. I remember the first time that I had a conversation with Debashish, which she doesn't remember my first semester, last semester. I had mentioned something about the Yoga Sutras, and I was like, well, what's the point of learning about taking an introduction to yoga class if you already, have mastered the Yoga Sutra books? And he said to me, yoga is way more expansive than just the Yoga Sutra, right? By him attacking my question with sincerity instead of belittling it because of my level of knowledge, what it did was it changed my life, right? It changed my life. And it gave me the encouragement to go forward. He has no idea that that impact was on him or on me. But this is a good example, in my humble opinion, of a healthy teacher. And you see these echoed through people like Krishnamurti, Bell Hooks, Jesus, and a lot of other people, Daniel Lip. Um, and so essentially, we have a whole bunch of societal problems, and we leave the children to play hot potato with it, right? They're going to ask questions about things like, why do we celebrate Thanksgiving if it has a strange history? Why are there so many poor people? Why is violence punished? But in all video games and movies we play, it's accessible. We should not live in a society where young people can ask questions that even in adulthood we have the cowardice about, leaving our youth to wrestle with deep philosophical questions with no guidance from adults. Existential questions posed by youth innocently trample over hardened stereotypes and mental walls and dogmas held by us. And I know I have 5 minutes. So last quote by
Joseph,
Confucius. Yeah. Or am
you
I
have
out of
2
time?
minutes according to my clock.
Okay, let me just skip forward then. So I have talk about a wellness center, which teaches people about the somatic body, stress and inflammation, with the three-stage approach to improving, which will be in nature because there's a lot of health benefits, focusing on 5 wealths. Sorry, I'm really sliding through this. And then looking at intergenerational health. And so the idea being, yeah, how do we notice progress not just within one's lifetime, but within one's lifetime, one's children, and one's grandchildren's lifetime. There's more, but I will just leave it at that. So essentially, the last section, I'll just skip forward to being examining American archetypes, and having discussions about that as a way of bringing us together as a people, and um, and encouraging youth to have the right to an idea in the Black community called funk, and universally allowing for youth to have the right to humor, because that keeps us human and that keeps us connected. So I appreciate everybody for the time, and I will end there.
Thank you so much, Joseph. A single question from anybody for Joseph?
I mean, I wouldn't mind jumping in just for a second because you ended on funk. And I just wanted to maybe if you could take this question and just to extend what you might have said in the presentation on how does funk come into this? Because I know that that's a music that's steeped with countercultural, revolutionary potentials and has done a lot in history, yet it's also been quite undermined by the kind of the culture industries as well. And so how are you dealing with this in kind of from the periphery of the countercultural value in it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and shout out to your knowledge of funk. You are a funketeer. So I believe that at the time that basically George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic were intentionally looking at themes that started from Freudian ideas of things like the id and the pleasure principle, but instead of discouraging it, they were encouraging a connection to it and an exploration of it. I consider funk to be a obscure term like the word Wu Wei in Taoism, and I believe that it taps into a concept similar to Goethe's participatory method, where just where it can transpose a person to a certain state that cannot necessarily be measured scientifically. And um, this allows for us to reconnect with ourselves on a very ground level, very similar to active participation by Daniel Lipp. So essentially, if this is making sense, the what am I trying to say? Essentially, tapping into funk allows for a person to uh experience the vibrancy of the now. It is something that everybody can tap into, and it's huge psychological effects. And it also goes against like things like the DSM and like pathologizing everything and medicating everything. So that's like a little taste, if that answers your question, Jonathan. Thank you for the question.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's see if we have an occasion for further discussion along these lines. But for now, let's move on. And our third speaker is David Glover. David's talk is Becoming Imperceptible, Reimagining Martial Arts as a Path to Ecological Awareness. David.
Thank you. And can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let me try sharing this. All right. Sorry, gonna move some stuff around. Yeah, so thank you. And Yeah, Anshul and Joseph, it's interesting. We have completely different topics, but there's actually some overlap, which I thought was really cool. And just some of the things Anshu talked about, like the deterioration and what to do about it. This idea of connecting. You talked about technology to the self, ecological. Joseph, you mentioned. You also talked about technologies in a different context. This the term bifurcation, I had not come across that, but that's yeah, I wrote that one down, and I'll talk to that using a different word, and then also relating. And what I'm going to talk about, you mentioned martial arts as being more than just movies, so I want to address that as well. So before I begin, if folks on the call, if you're open to it, I'd like to take you through a short awareness exercise that kind of gets to what this is about. So if you are open to it, please close your eyes and just take a breath in and breathe out, and just feel your body make contact to a surface, whether you're sitting or standing. Do you feel that the pressure of where that contact space is with the ground, with the earth, with your chair? Are you aware of any tension in your body? Maybe your neck or your shoulders. That's where I tend to hold it. And if so, can you let it go? Maybe breathe into it. Now I want you to think about extending your awareness outward. Do you have a sense of where you are in whatever space you're in? Are there light sources that maybe you can sense through your closed eyes? Any sounds in your environment? Can you tell where they're coming from, what they are? Do you notice any smells? Are there any other people or other beings around you? Maybe a pet or a plant? Maybe there's trees outside your window. And do you have a sense of where they are relative to where you are? And what else are you noticing through your body that not so much the thought, but the sensation? All right. So thank you for um, doing that with me, and please open your eyes. So I'm going to run through this real quick. So what looking at today, I want to look at just kind of start with contemporary martial arts as a reflection of the social, cultural, sort of what led me to this inquiry. The question I'm asking is, how might martial arts training be reimagined as a path to ecological awareness? And I'll define that in a minute. And just to be clear, I'm looking at this question through the lens of my own experiences as well as multiple theoretical frameworks. So hopefully they'll um, flow together somewhat. And looking at martial arts as an ecological practice, and then applying a new lens to martial arts, what I'm using the term imperceptibility, and I'll explain that as well. And then finally, what might imperceptibility look like outside martial arts? So the idea with autoethnography is in research is looking at the researcher's own experiences, but then ultimately, how does that translate outside of the individual experiences to others as well? So in contemporary times, martial arts are often about domination, where individuals seek to physically dominate others through full contact striking, kicking, grappling, chokes, throws, and holds. And this is represented by combat sport martial arts like MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and combat martial arts like Krav Maga. And there's a training emphasis that often emphasizes, to quote Bowman, real fighting. And these representations tend to focus on the violence. So this is I did a search on MMA, and this is like one of the first pictures that popped up of many that represented this type of image. And there is an other to this domination perspective, what are often put in the bucket of traditional martial arts that are represented by more form practices like Tai Chi Chuan or karate. And these forms are often criticized by the domination, so the more like the MMA practitioners, for not having realistic training. So it kind of broaden this lens out to the broader social cultural perspective. And Rian Eisler wrote a book in 1987 called The Chalice and the Blade, and in it she presented contrasting models or paradigms of social structures and values. And the first one, what she called the dominator model, the blade, and it's a model, and she said, quote, "It's the power to take rather than give life that is the ultimate power to establish and enforce domination," end quote. So it's about power and control. And one thing this model does is it dichotomizes. So to use Joseph's word, it bifurcates human experience. It splits things into dualities such as masculine, feminine, us, them, human nature, and also creates hierarchies that rate individuals and things, which basically privileges some and denigrates or devalues others. And so this model is essentially about dominating and controlling other people in nature. And Eisler argues that this is the predominant model in contemporary society and has been this way for thousands of years. And then Eisler also presented a second model, which he called the partnership model. She said, quote, "In this model, social relations are primarily based on the principle of linking rather than ranking. And this model reflects feminist, equalitarian, and ecological values. In this model, diversity or difference are not equated with either inferiority or superiority. This model is about connection and relationship, not domination." And so kind of tying back to the first two presenters, so one symptom of the domination model is disconnection. So many people today feel disconnected from the earth, from one another, and from their own bodies. And so society and culture reinforces these disconnections through technologies like smartphones and social media. So to address these disconnections at an individual and ultimately societal level, we need more than knowledge and theory. We need a new way of perceiving and being in the world. However, the challenge is, as Eisler wrote, that after 5,000 years of living in a dominator society, it is indeed difficult to imagine a different world. So how does one go from a domination perspective that sort of underlies a lot of modern, I'd say especially Western culture and way of being, to a partnership and relationship perspective and way of being? So I want to introduce a term, ecological awareness, and this is a conglomerate definition. So I'm drawing from both eco-psychology and ecological psychology. So I'm defining it as a way of sensing, relating, and moving that arises from embeddedness within and interconnectedness with the living world. So it's more than environmental knowledge, but it's a capacity for connection that can be developed. And so this is the core inquiry of this talk. So rather than reinforcing a paradigm of domination, what if martial arts are reimagined as a path to ecological awareness? And so how I got here. So I started actually in competitive triathlon. So triathlon is a swim, bike, run event. And my focus was the Ironman distance, which consisted of 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, and a 26.2-mile marathon. And I did these for over 14 years. And in this context, I was not only trying to dominate other competitors, but also trying to dominate my own body, to use Debashish's terms, colonizing my own body, to make it perform at the highest level I could. But for me, this wasn't sustainable, and it ultimately led to injuries, overtraining, and burnout. And so I wanted to find something that was non-competitive and not about domination. And so using this metaphor in seed and soil, when I stopped doing triathlons in 2010 and 2014, I tried martial arts, and I just happened to pick the one that was closest to where I lived, and Ninpo Taijutsu. And so it's a Japanese martial art that the one I studied traces its lineage through 9 historical ninja and samurai fighting systems. And one thing to point out is that historical ninja were not warriors who sought to dominate in the conventional sense. So it wasn't about like overcoming with strength and power. And rather, they were more observers, infiltrators, and adaptive survivalists. And this is what I looked at for my dissertation research. So I looked at Ninpo Taijutsu as a technology of the self, as Anshul described earlier. it's a Michel Foucault's term for it's an intentional and disciplined practice of care of the self. And I looked at it, at how it's changed me. So I want to talk a little bit about it and start with more just martial arts training in general as an ecological encounter. So in this photo, my teacher, Dennis Mahoney on the left, he's moved inside. This is trainings, but he's moved inside an attacker space to access their vulnerable center while protecting his own. And why I'm calling it is an ecological encounter, because it is an interaction between at least three forces in an environment. There's, in this case, for training, there's usually someone designated as an attacker, someone designated as a defender who's demonstrating something or trying to perform something, but there's also gravity. So gravity is always present, and it can either work with or against one. So when attacked, even in training, a defender wants to be attuned to subtle cues, such as what is the other person's intentions, and what are the possible openings or affordances, to use J.J. Gibson's term, of the possibilities of action, and what's available. What are my opportunities to both protect myself as well as access the other person so I can stop the attack. And this attunement and awareness includes not only sight, but touch, timing, proprioception, and what we might call intuitive sensing, such as the felt sense of threat, a sense of safety, or potentiality. So an atypical quality of Ninpo Taijutsu as compared to other martial arts, especially combat sports like MMA, which typically try to match opponents by factors such as gender, weight class, and experience. Unlike MMA in a competition, Ninpo Taijutsu assumes an uncertain and asymmetrical situation, one where the other person may be bigger, stronger, faster, or armed with a weapon. And so here's an example of asymmetry. So my teacher, Dennis on the right, outweighs senior practitioner and teacher Rumiko Hayes on the left literally by 3 times. So that was the joke. He's 3 times Mrs. Hayes. In the second image, she's just thrown him by his finger, and she's smiling if you can see it. So the question is, how is that possible? It obviously cannot be because she's dominating him with size and strength. And so she used a quality of Ninpo Taijutsu called imperceptibility. So it's the ability to blend into the environment and disappear from perception. And she did this by blending into what was happening, so blending in with his attack to take away his awareness and balance to make him fight gravity instead of fighting her. And this gave her an advantage, even though he is clearly much stronger and bigger than she is. And so I'm going to have, talk a little bit about this. And really, it's also a mindset, a shift from doing things, which is what I would consider like a domination, it's like trying to overcome someone, to moving within a system, so more of a relationship or partnership. So in this video, I'm on the right, but I'm gonna attack Dennis on the left, and with 3 punches. So there's gonna be one. We'll do them 3 times, and we'll really want to pay attention to how he moves each time and his effect on me. And the first time is going to be very visible, and the second and third times are going to be more or less visible, so more imperceptible.
Punch in. Big and loud limbs. Contact, sensory information. Contact's here, body's got to be here. Loud. Taps out peripherals, right? So you're picking up all this data. It tells you where I am cognitively, right? What we're trying to affect is your sense of focus, such as your balance. So while I'm here in this shape, you're attacking that shape. But then this shape changes shape on you. It changes back. And you're caught up in the shape changes. Your focus is caught up in the shape changes. So it becomes less perceptible. And I'm making it bigger than it has to be so that we can see it. But that's the idea of this. Now, that doesn't mean we still don't use the hands and do the weapons. We absolutely do. Now, it just becomes much. Yeah, you're already broken.
Yeah, I'm running into you.
And you're running into my weapons because of the break.
So just his first response, he was just trying to demonstrate, how people typically move. It's very big and very visible. It doesn't really affect me. I mean, obviously he could defend himself. On the second two, he's not moving that much, but he's having an effect on me. And the third one, I actually kind of fell into his fist. He didn't actually punch me. I essentially punched myself. But the idea is that what I'm talking about is this idea of how to connect to the environment, developing this ecological awareness. And there's qualities of it, and I'll just kind of highlight these real quickly. But the idea that it starts in the center of the body, so I'm not moving outside, so it tends to be not as visible. We're using gravity and changes in balance, so not muscular force. So to move with muscular force would be an example, like if I'm stepping with force, I'm pushing off against the ground, it creates a parabolic arc. Like if I throw a baseball, you can see the arc of a baseball and you can catch it because you know where it's going to land. But there's other ways to move where it's not as predictable. This movement tends to be more quiet, soft, and minimal. And in Dennis's example, I mean, he didn't really move at all, very much. I mean, he subtly shifted, but in such a way that it still had an effect on me. And what it ends up being is because of this awareness that you can develop, it becomes more responsive and not reactive. So it's more connected to what's going on. And together these create unpredictability and uncertainty for me as the attacker. And what the cool thing about is when playing with these ideas with movement, is that they are observable and testable. And so I'll give you an example, and this is an example of something that it came out of the training. This is not something I trained for, but this was a demonstration. We had given a talk after my dissertation about what imperceptible movement looks like, and this is actually an example of the Saki test, where when it's typically done is the person giving the test has a training sword. They're standing behind the person taking the test, who's kneeling with their eyes closed, and the person kneeling is supposed to sense when the attacker is about to strike, and as they strike, they're supposed to move away. So we're just doing it standing up, but you'll see the point. So just pay attention. There's going to be two examples of what I'm talking about.
If he goes flat-footed and tries to do this, and I come down with intent to hit him, well, I'll show you. Watch. Get ready. Get flat-footed. When you feel me coming, see him push down and come from here? He's flat-footed. When I got close, his body didn't like it. Didn't balance. There you go. When people are balancing, your proprioception in here and out here goes out.
So, and there's some terminology being thrown around, but in the first instance, I reacted late after the strike had already come down. I mean, my body reacted. I couldn't hear it, but my body reacted. But I was out of balance, so I was just standing there rigidly. I was disconnected. I wasn't aware of my environment. And the second time, it demonstrated some more of a sensitivity. And the thing to point out about this is by getting into what we're calling balance, and this is something that I practice in other contexts, but it opens up this sensitivity where I'm reacting to something. I'm allowing my body to react to the environment without actually having to see it. And then because I'm using the movement, this is both observable and testable. So this is something I actually want to do some research on with folks and provide some type of training and evaluate, how whether or not people can do this. So how might training for this imperceptible movement cultivate ecological awareness? One thing is when you're using movement, there's both observable and felt feedback, and this facilitates learning. And because it's observable, a teacher, for example, observing can also provide feedback. Imperceptibility necessitates fine-tuning of perception and responsiveness. So in order to be imperceptible, I kind of have to know where I am in space. I have to know where they are, and have to become more in tune with what not only I see and perceive, but also what they see and perceive, so I can minimize that. This fine-tuning improves affordances. So what are the possibilities? So having this ecological awareness creates more options. And this is an ongoing and iterative process. It's not a skill one develops and automatically have. As you said, you saw in the earlier demo when I moved it, but it's a somatic state that one can get into, but it has to be it's not something that, like I said, it happens automatically, but it's something that, okay, I can set it up to, and ultimately, I mean, hopefully down the road it becomes more habitual.
David, just one minute according to my clock.
Okay, and so a good example of this is a spider on a web would be another way to think about it. The idea that you can take these ideas like starting in the center of the body, quiet movement, responsive movement. You can apply it to other practices, and so what I'm talking about is ultimately a shift from domination to partnership. Its qualities to bring to movement. So these qualities can be brought to other movement practices like yoga, or even walking. It's a way. It's a process. It's a way of being, and it's also what I believe is a pathway to reconnection. And one question I like to ask myself, and kind of to get back to this quieter, softer, more subtle movement is how and where can I have a softer touch on the world? And so the question you might want to ask is how might you also have develop this concept of imperceptibility in your own life? So references, and thank you. And yes, yeah, similar to Joseph, there's a lot more I could have said. So it's always challenging to fit things in.
Yeah, sure, David. Yeah, let's see if we have a chance to unpack some more of that at the end. But if there's any one question that people would like to ask at this point. Okay, I think let's move on. The next speaker is Sucandra. Sucandra will talk about the 6 virtues through the Heart Sutra, Transdisciplinary Soteriology. Sucandra, it's all yours, and you can go till when, Jonathan?
Thank you, Debashish and everybody.
11:30.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And David, thank you for your presentation. I think last time you went after me, so very fun this time to go after you. My presentation today will be on the 6 virtues of the Heart Sutta. The Heart Sutta itself is very vast, and we're not going to go into it, but there are many versions all over Google. If you want, you can find. In essence, this presentation will share 6 methods of transformation. So while you listen, I invite you to take a collective breath in through the nose. Let it go with a sigh. And allow yourself to consider, as you listen, what would it be like to utilize this in my everyday life? Could these methods not only inform but enhance my mental health and the field of mental health studies? So when it comes to spiritual praxis, it's very important to note that spiritual teachings should be taught to one as it's appropriate, right? By levels of appropriateness, not appropriation. So we will touch on some fundamentals, but also an opportunity to, again, really dive inside. So to really understand what this dialogue will be about, we're going to have to dissect a little. What are we dissecting? The Sanskrit. So prajna, paramita, hridaya, right? So we have several words here. Prajna, paramita, hridaya. This is really the longer version, which we're not going to focus on. But in order to understand, I really cannot begin to understand where essences come from if we don't know what is the native language it's originating from. So here, within the Sanskrit, prajna means wisdom. Traditionally, this has 3 meanings. We have the metaphysical, so this is the true principle. We have the contemplative, the true wisdom, and the literary, which is considered like the true teachings, right? We need all these 3 factors. And if we dive in a little bit deeper, we actually see that there are 5 meanings. The fourth one, will be the meaning of retinue. So innumerable practices. And the 5th one would be the field of sense objects. So this is all phenomena, right? The mind objects. So if we take these 5 meanings I mentioned just now, we see prajna to mean the cultivation of both blessings and wisdom in order to comprehend the meanings of existence and emptiness. Now I know emptiness is a term thrown left and right, but by the end of this presentation, I hope you have a little better idea of what this is going to mean for us. So when prajna or wisdom is cultivated, something we see is an eradication of negative habitual patterns, negative tendencies of the mind, right? We're not being as reactive as maybe we would have been previously. This is foremost. Para means the other shore. Traditionally, we would refer to this as Bodhi or Nibbana. Right? This can be explained in 5 aspects. First, what has been known through some means or knowledge, right? What's come before. Second, the teachings themselves. Third, the principles. Fourth, the practices. And 5th, the fruits of practice or the results. Mita. This means leaving or even reaching what's being left behind. Because when we practice diligently, the habits that have been harmful, gone, right? We cultivate what's beneficial, what's useful for our lives. Leave behind all the defilements. So why prajna paramita? Because it encompasses cause and effect, right? This is why we call it prajna paramita. Hridaya, heart. This signifies essence or excellence. So the Heart Sutta is the essence of the teaching of emptiness itself. It's short so that people don't get discouraged, right? Easy to digest the meaning. If we can keep it simple, then we understand. If we understand, then we can practice. And if we can practice, then we can transform ourselves, our lives, and help others. So Mahadeva once said that just as one distinguishes gold from sand, so distinguish and hold to the truth. So here, it's relying on the 4 noble truths, right? Carefully reflecting on the teachings. And then we see that just as we can distinguish, again, gold from sand, we can distinguish what's true and what's real. What's truer than that? Moving forward, Venerable Nagarjuna explained this. He said that the true nature of conditioned is empty. For such things are illusory, dependently arisen. Unconditional things also lack substantial reality, for they are unsubstantial, like flowers in the sky. So if we actually take time with this text, we see that it's a step-by-step guide for realization. So let's just come back to emptiness for a little while. Emptiness is with dependent origination. Now, if we practice the 6 virtues, right? The 6 paramitas, we see here what we have is generosity, morality, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. So these are not like, hey, do these step by step. No. They're just methods, right? Methods that seem simple, but simple, as we know, is not always easy. It's easy to fool ourselves that we're being generous or patient. But are we really in every moment of our life, even with ourselves? Generosity means we do from the heart, not for sensual pleasure, but for the virtuous benefit of ourselves and of others, right? Both these factors, very important. Without one of the factors, then we can cause so much more harm, either to ourselves or others, right? So here we exert ourselves to eliminate affliction, right? To generate contentment. Generosity is not, I'm going to go to Anshul and I'm going to give him $1,000. That's not generosity. Generosity is, how do I cultivate myself for the sake of others, right? And then from that, I will know how to act. I will know what it means to be generous because I know how to be generous within myself, then I can be with others, right? So it means to give and receive with genuine happiness, both sides. Morality. So this is the study of undertaking actions that are not going to cause harm. Not cause harm through what? Not cause harm in body, in speech, and in mind. Oftentimes we think, oh, nobody can read my mind. I can think whatever I want. But the thing is, the mind is so powerful, the most powerful instrument in the world. So everything I think is eventually going to come out, right? Either through my speech or my actions, my physical actions. This is where skillful means comes from, right? Why we need to develop skillful means. Patience. This is the biggest obstacle in contemplative practice, right? Specifically in meditation, we're always wanting to run to and from something, wanting to achieve something. But what if we take that collective pause? Just like when the presentation began, we took a deep breath in and we let it go. If we can have patience, then we don't harm others. We don't, again, harm ourselves either. Traditionally, there are 3 kinds of patience. But for the sake of time, we will go into that at another presentation. Energy. This is putting in right effort to practice, again, to cultivate oneself. Being virtuous enough to help ourselves, help another. So whatever we're doing, we can apply this to, right? So if we are sitting in class and we don't like the topic, okay, how can I energize myself enough? Like, how does this apply to my life in this very moment? Because every little thing that happens, it actually applies, right? When we're writing that paper that feels dreadful, all of us have been there, and it's fine. But how am I going to write it with awareness, mindfulness, with my whole heart there, my whole mind there, or with distraction trying to rush, right? Can everything we do be like a meditation? Stable concentration. Wisdom. Here, wisdom means to discriminate properly, right? The faculty of discrimination of various circumstances that arise in our life. So realizing the truth of reality as it is through practice, right? More and more, right? Because we have the ultimate truth, we have the relative truth, and we live in relative truth. Yet there's also maybe another form of reality that most of us are blinding ourselves to. What is that? And it doesn't mean go daydream left and right, but to see, again, what's true, what's real, and what's truer than that. In Sanskrit, one of my favorite mantras is Om Tat Sat. What's true and what's real. So emptiness doesn't imply non-existence, right? It doesn't mean there's nothing here. No. It implies the law of cause and effect. The 12 links of dependent origination, which I would encourage you to dive deeper into at a future time, if this is something interesting to you. So these 6 paramitas, these 6 perfections, these 6 qualities, they help us create conditions that are beneficial for our lives, right? So dependent origination has 12 factors. The first 2 are based on the past, right? We have ignorance, lack of understanding of true nature, volitional formations, our intentions. These are conditioned by body, speech, and mind, conditioned by ignorance, though. Then we have the next, going into the present, what we're having now, and what will happen in the future. Again, highly encourage you to dive into this further. So let's come back to the first paramita, generosity. Why we practice? Why should we not be greedy? Why should we give with our whole heart? And what will that imply for society afterward? Condition, action, situation. What condition am I creating through my actions and situations, right? So a condition influences the action I'm going to take, and that's going to create the next situation, which is going to create the next condition and the next action. So where is our awareness right now? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sucandra, and thank you for your very concise presentation. I know that you could have expanded on all these things much further, but I think you gave a really nice nutshell of your entire presentation. So if anybody would like to ask one question at this point, we have the time for that.
Hi, I'd love to ask a question. Thank you so much for that lovely talk. In practice, I find myself caught on the one hand between my typical intention, which is shikantaza, or just sitting, and the more sort of detailed or early Buddhist flavored teachings from Rob Burbea on dependent origination and emptiness. And that all gets distracting. And so I just wonder about like a simple intention for practice that sort of allows consideration for both this view from the Mahayana on emptiness that you've elaborated on here and a more like ways of looking oriented approach, which I often find to require more doing.
Thank you. I think the first step, the most important step, is going to be mindfulness. When we sit, just sit. When you attend to the breath, if your object of focus is the breath, right? Traditionally, we focus right below the nostril, that warm breath coming in and out. So you sit there, focus on the breath. If it feels too abstract, the mind is wandering, then you can count the breath cycles. Every exhale, 1. Next exhale, 2, right? Up to 5 and begin again. If that even feels distracting, even labeling the breath, inhale and exhale. Mind comes in, thoughts arise, label the thought, thinking. Not defining the thought, not judging, right? But in this way, you build concentration, and that's the first step. After concentration, then we go further. But that's essential. And even if we look at enlightened masters, we look at the Dalai Lama, every single day he practices, not just analytically. Concentration, always to develop.
Thank you, Sucandra. We move on to our last talk for this session, and this will be Mia Pozniansky. Mia's talk is Polyphonic Reality, Reflecting on My Attendance of the 7th International Conference on Dialogical Practices held in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Mia, it's yours.
Thank you, Debashish, and thank you, Sucandra. It's great to see you. And I will have to bring us all a little bit more into substantial reality and relative truth, but hopefully it will still be connected to your talk as well. So let me share my screen, make this bigger, and please let me know that you are seeing my screen. Would you believe me if I told you that dialogue has the power to transform art, heal mental illness, and even create new realities? It may sound a bit grandiose, but let me take you on a journey through music, literature, therapy, and the big questions of modernity. We will be guided by at least 4 voices on this journey. The voices that, though from different places and times, reflect the power of polyphonic dialogue. These are the voices that I like to invite. We have a voice of Fyodor Dostoevsky, who is a world-famous novelist, Mikhail Bakhtin, a philosopher and literary critic, Jacko Sekula and his clinical team of Finnish mental health, and Svetlana Broz, who is the granddaughter of Marshal Tito and the author of the book Good People in an Evil Time. These are the names of our guides today, yet there are countless others. More and more people are beginning to acknowledge that while we share this world, we live in multiple realities and see things very differently. In fact, what drew me to this research was the realization of the value of multiplicity of different worldviews that exist in our modern world. I initially believed it to be an unsolvable challenge, but I am here today to show you that the resolution is hidden within the challenge itself. The word polyphony originally comes from music, multiple independent melodies coexisting without overpowering each other. But in literature and psychology, it means something deeper, a space where multiple voices, truths, and realities can exist side by side without being forced into agreement. The Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky was a master of creating this revolutionary space of polyphonic dialogue in his writing. There was no ultimate true reality against which his characters' views were measured. Every voice, however sick or delusional, had its contribution. I was 10 years old when I read Crime and Punishment, and I remember very vividly being stunned by the multiple layers of meaning and realities of this book. This left a profound mark on me because right then and there, I decided that I wanted to study the human soul. I became a psychologist because of Dostoevsky. Here's one interesting fragment from Crime and Punishment that stunned me all afresh just last year as I was rereading this masterpiece. It is a dream of a main protagonist as he is serving time for murder. He dreamt that the whole world was condemned to a terrible new strange plague. Some new sorts of microbes were attacking the bodies of men, but these microbes were endowed with intelligence and will. Men attacked by them became at once mad and furious, but never had men considered themselves so intellectual and so completely in possession of the truth as these sufferers. Each thought that he alone had the truth and was wretched looking at the others, beat himself on the breast, wept, and wrung his hands. That was written in 1866. And thus spoke Dostoevsky. Michael Bakhtin studied Dostoevsky's writing about a century later. And he said that through his unique polyphonic novels, Dostoevsky identified the loud, recognized, reigning voice of the epoch, that is, the reigning dominant ideas, official and unofficial, as well as voices still weak, ideas not yet fully emerged, embryos of the future worldviews. Even though Michael Bakhtin came into my life much later, it was he who reintroduced the concept of polyphony in connection to Dostoevsky's writing, and who went on to create a social theory which states that society thrives not through conformity or consensus, but through the healthy tension of many perspectives, constantly creating and recreating new meanings. The light bulb in my head went on during my first semester as East-West psychologist doctoral student when I re-encountered Bakhtin in Dr. Banerji's class on multicultural hermeneutics. There, I was hearing multiple voices of modernity. And so another quote by Bakhtin stood out to me. Truth is not born, nor is it to be found inside the head of an individual person. It is born between people collectively searching for truth in the process of their dialogic interaction. So my first introduction to Bakhtin actually happened during my training in open dialogue approach back in 2017. In the 1980s, Jacko and his colleagues in Finland began using the open dialogue approach based on the concept of polyphony to treat people experiencing psychosis. Their approach was revolutionary. Instead of ignoring delusions, they invited them in, and they worked to multiply voices by always working in groups, having reflective teams, and actively engaging patient and patients' families. The goal was to maintain an open, ongoing, real-time conversation where no single perspective dominated. There was no mandate for psychotropics, no authoritative monologue from psychiatrists or therapists, just a few clever ways to sustain polyphonic dialogue. And so you see here the results of a 19-year follow-up on patient functionality, which compares two groups, the group that received treatment under the open dialogue approach and the group that received typical outpatient treatment. You see the reduced hospitalization rates, more independent living, less reliance on neuroleptics, and reduced instances of lifelong disability. However, the most commonly reported effects that many consider secondary are participants feeling heard, experiencing the emergence of new meaning and ideas, understanding other points of view, and having an enhanced sense of connection. All this without any explicit demand to critically self-reflect and to reach consensus. I was just as intrigued by the open dialogue approach as a former clinician as I was again now as a seeker of new dialogic modalities for multicultural communication. The open dialogue approach hasn't quite taken roots in the US, largely because of how our mental system is built. But in Europe, it's steadily growing. Since I decided to make a bridge between open dialogue clinical methodology and non-clinical multicultural communication, I searched for their upcoming conferences. Coincidentally, the 7th International Conference on Dialogical Practices was held in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And when I say coincidentally, I'm not exaggerating. You can see the locations of previous conferences: Finland, Belgium, Norway, Italy, Argentina, Czech Republic, and here we are, 2025, Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Meant to be. Bosnia and Herzegovina is still healing from a devastating war fueled by ethnic and religious fragmentation. Many people still cannot explain what exactly happened 30 years ago. Some prefer not to speak of it at all. Yet, I felt like I was a part of a unique witnessing and processing that had as much to do with the past as it had to do with our global future. For example, I talked to people from a nonprofit organization that sends a group of veterans who are former enemies from 3 armies to speak with the young people. These veterans are wholeheartedly committed to their work as the role models of polyphonic coexistence despite a bloody past. They can be seen as embodied polyphony. Many of my experiences during this conference demonstrated that polyphony isn't just conversational method, it's a lifeline. An older woman talked about how her paternal grandmother, back in 1945, was stripped naked, shaved bald, and paraded heavily pregnant by her neighbors across a small European town after the German soldiers, one of whom were the baby's father, were expelled back to Germany. She talked about what the label of enemy collaborator did to 3 generations of her family. She said she realized this impact fully during the open dialogue. Another conference attendee referenced the book by Svetlana Broz, Good People in the Evil Time. I'm not even done reading it because just like with Dostoevsky's novels, each voice presents a different reality. And my work as a reader is to slow down and to allow this multiple truth to enter into the communion with my spirit. It is complex but fascinating work of meaning making. And so I want to share one quote by Svetlana here with you. It says, identities are not what they seem. We read the word of a woman with a Muslim name who is a Catholic, of a man with a Serbian name who considers himself a Muslim, of a boy who claims to be Yugoslav, of a child of mixed marriage who switches identity halfway through the war. Yet in the context of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, people found themselves forced into rigid ethno-religious group, Catholic, Muslim, and Eastern Orthodox Christian. It was these 3 groups that were placed against each other during the war. And the following quote can be attributed to any member of any of these 3 groups. If I knew then what I know now, I would never have been in war. I would have fled abroad the way so many other people did. I don't want anyone to ever go through this again. We were doing fine in peace, and then off we went to war for a bunch of thugs. When I started my graduate studies, I was overwhelmed by the apparent fragmentation of cultural narratives around me, globally and locally, and the evident impossibility of consensus. How can anyone ever bridge all these gaps between opposing values, identities, and truth? Now, however, I know that we're not meant to collapse difference into sameness. From Dostoevsky to Bakhtin, from Bakhtin to open dialogue approach, to my research on multicultural communication, polyphony is really about the skill of creating spaces where all voices are invited and none are dismissed or erased. My upcoming research focuses on applying the principles of polyphony to our discussions of modernity and of the future. And here I want to bring the 5th voice, the voice of my co-pilot AI. It helped a great deal with generating images that you saw and enjoyed for this presentation and organizing some of the linkages between ideas. So I asked for its opinion on the open dialogue and multicultural communication. And this is what it said. True dialogue, where every voice is heard, must become the foundation of how we shape the future. Well, I was glad it was on board. So if you too would like to participate in the study of applying principles of polyphony to student multicultural dialogue, please watch for my call for participants closer to the fall semester. Meanwhile, you can also try leaving your information on my newly launched website. Disclaimer, no guarantees. It was launched literally less than a week ago, and I had no time to check it for bugs, logical errors, or even update it to my new legal name. But you are welcome to try it anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia, for that very rich presentation of your recent conference visit and your research, what guides you and inspires you in life. So one question, if anybody would like to ask to Mia before I give some concluding remarks, and we open it up, if possible, for a few more questions.
I could just ask a quick question about the roots of polyphony and if it has a relation to music in Potkin's coming to it, or if you've explored that as well in your own experience, how it may relate to music. It's not only a musical term, but it's a very important musical term as well. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually wish I had time and opportunity to delve more into that and see, similarities, because I'm not a musician. I mean, I play piano a little bit, but I wouldn't call it anything like a musical intelligence. So again, if I ever to collaborate with someone who can guide me through that addition of polyphony in action through the music, I would love to.
And is that part of the root of the term in Potkin? Did he draw the musical into his
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Bakhtin
Okay.
totally, I would say, appropriated it from music. He
The
pulled it
musical
into the
model.
literature from music, yes.
Very cool. I've got to do that research. I know Debashish, you've mentioned it before, but yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I think this was a really rich session with 5 talks, all 5 really provocative and stimulating. I'd like to maybe just touch on these talks and then kind of note some commonalities or overarching thoughts related to that, the session. So the first talk, of course, was by Anshul, and Anshul spoke to us about agriculture and a shift, needed shift in our approach to agriculture. And I think he presented his, compelling narrative where he was really talking about a certain kind of a ontological shift. We have to shift not merely in our practices in a compromised sense, but in our practices in the sense of who we are and how we experience reality. And to that end, he used the term post-human. I would say that's a kind of a really provocative and rich, way to look at agriculture and, what exactly it means. He tried to parse it out a little bit, what post-human means to him. And I think we can consider that a little more in our consideration of the entire session. The second talk was by Joseph Johnson, and again, a wonderful talk about disenfranchised people and how they are sort of kept who they are by a variety of forces and factors, hegemonic factors, and how one can offer them a space to find themselves, to find a voice and a future. in which those forces that keep them conditioned are not repeated. In other words, something which creates a new kind of reality. And so in that sense, there too a looking forward to a different identity, even I would say a different ontology, though it is not clearly spelt out. It is more spelt out in terms of what things we can change in our lives to create a sustainable future. One of the things that Joseph addressed is transhumanism, because the first part of his talk was about technology and its deleterious effects. That was also part of Anshul's talk, the way in which technology has taken us further and further away from the wholeness of reality, the wholeness of the earth and of the world. So from that point of view, he raised the specter of transhumanism, where we look towards becoming fully prostheticized androids that, in a sense, are improvements on our human condition. And of course, there are severe problems with that. But what Joseph didn't mention explicitly, but I'd say underlay his argument, is in a sense similar to what Anshul was saying, the need for the post-human. The post-human is not the transhuman. And we can discuss that a little bit as far as the entire session is concerned, because I think with or without explicit mention, I think the post-human idea was very present during the entire session. The third was David Glover, and he was talking about martial arts as ecological awareness and the need to shift the entire paradigm of of sports as well as of combat sports, which is itself a kind of a very, I'd say, unappeasing name or term. But nevertheless, the way in which these sports have been seen as forms of competition, how one can look at martial arts, on the other hand, as ecological practices. And towards that end, how a certain aspect of the martial arts that he has been practicing, which is what he calls becoming imperceptible, plays into the notion of a ecological condition. And here too, one can talk about the post-human, and I would like to touch on that as we go on. Um, as David said, he could have said a lot more, but due to the severe constraints of time, he had to restrict himself to this notion of how to become imperceptible in terms of situations of danger, of hostility, etc. But of course, his argument is turned towards an ecological environment. And there, the more that David, I know, would have liked to say has to do with how our environment is conditioned, how we are under a state of surveillance, both from the viewpoint of national control, citizenship, as well as from the view of consumerism, being made into producers and consumers, and conditioned from that point of view in a interdependent world. And how this notion of becoming imperceptible plays into challenging that and creating openings to something which perhaps belongs to the future. The next talk was by Sucandra, and Sucandra was drawing out the practices of the Pragya Paramita Hridaya Sutras in Mahayana Buddhism, to open up another term that was consistently used in a number of talks, technologies of the self. Why is it important? So, in a sense, Mahayana practices have been around for a long time. And the question that we can ask that was implicit in Suchandra's talk was, what makes them so important to us today? Because in a way, we are in a condition where our interdependence has amplified a lot in our times, and at the same time, it has become a prison that we can experience, much more acutely than we could before. So the question of what practices can actually give us a sense of freedom, can give us a sense of something outside, something that is not constrained by the various factors that constrain us, is in a way just like the need for becoming imperceptible. Finally, we had Mia's talk on polyphonic reality and on the work of Mikhail Bakhtin. And I think there it's very interesting to note how that might be seen in side by side with Suchandra's talk. Mia, at her very beginning, raised that comparison. And I think this notion of a interdependent or codependent world is at the center of both. But Mia's approach to it is almost the diametric opposite of Suchandra's approach, where the need is to find a space outside, while with Mia, the need is to find that space inside. In other words, that this codependent world is also a world of polyphony. It's a world of multiple visions and perspectives of the world. And that these perspectives can either, in the graphic image of Dostoevsky's dream, be a plague and a disease in which we tear ourselves apart, tear each other apart, which is what we're doing to some extent with the cultural crisis of our time. Or we can actually internalize and allow to shared meaning to arise for the future. And from that point of view, I see it also as a post-human practice. So I'd like to draw on this term post-humanism to look at all these talks a little bit. The word post-humanism, as Anshul pointed out, has two elements or two ways or approaches by which it can be understood. One is most historical and cultural. That is, who do we take ourselves to be as humans today? We are constituted as humans, but given a certain definition as a human. We are told, whether we accept it or not, that we belong to a global world which is ubiquitous. It doesn't matter which country you came from. It doesn't matter what cultural history you came from. From a certain point in time, the world has spread into a single unit. And it's really a hegemonic, what we could put in scare quotes and called Western world. And that Western world has got certain roots, even because the West itself is a historical construct. It has a point at which it becomes a modern Western world that then spreads across and becomes a global world through a variety of dynamics, perhaps the most important of which is colonialism. So that image of the human that has been universalized and normalized throughout the world today, that we take each other to be, that we encounter wherever we go, particularly in urban centers, um, is the human that we're talking about in terms of codependence, interdependence, um, globalization, and things of that kind. And that particular human, that image of the human, ultimately there are certain roots to it, the root of Cartesianism, for example. And I'm not going to go into depth on what are the various features. Summary is not about that. But what I'd like to mention is that image of the human has created a global crisis in our times. And that crisis is what all these talks were addressing in their own ways. That crisis is a crisis of the earth, of the biosphere, of the ecology, and of culture. At all these levels, we have created a crisis situation because of the normalized image of the human. And that is one way in which when we talk about post-human, we are saying, how can we open up that particular um, closure, that particular accepted norm, so that that which has not been let in can be let in? How can we accept as human what we've excluded from the human or what we've suppressed from the human? So that is one notion of the post-human that was there, I'd say, in all the talks. And the other notion of the post-human is what is outside the human, what is beyond the human, what is the future that the definition of the human does not accommodate. And I think that was also very powerfully present in all these talks, because that speaks to the crisis of our times as an ontological crisis, but also a crisis in a sense which is eschatological, which has a element of the end times in it. We almost feel as if we are at a point where we need to be reborn into something else. So that's the notion of the post-human as the future ontology that, in a sense, was present in most of these talks, I'd say. I'd also like to talk about agriculture in terms of what Anshul called Homo agricola. And sometimes we think that the image of the human, as I said myself, has been normalized through colonialism. But sometimes we can go even further back in time and say perhaps the image of the human has been normalized through certain shared symbolic understandings that arose even during the time that Anshul is talking about, when we moved from being hunters and food gatherers to become civilized people, to become Homo agricola. Maybe that was the first colonization, the colonization of the earth, the colonization of nature itself. Um, Yet, and I know there are some people today, even in the field of post-human studies, who'd like us to go back and become persons domiciled within nature, um, along with other animals, along with the trees, leading lives of nomads, hunters, and food gatherers. But I feel that that is a extreme step that loses the point in a sense. And I think that what Anshul is pointing to, and in a way was hinted at by a lot of these talks, is that we may have a capacity to grow back into this notion of a world that we don't own. It's not the ontology of ownership or of property, but it's a world which we co-constitute. Here, the notion of codependence is coming back. And I think that the interesting difference between Sucandra and Mia's talks, where in a sense, this co-constitution, we are co-constituted by a partial acceptance. Rather, if we really can feel ourselves to be truly co-constituted, not an acceptance that is hegemonically established, but an acceptance that opens up that particular constitution. And that can be done in two ways. And I think that should be done in both those ways. One is by finding a space outside it, and the other is in opening it up so that other voices can enter it and have an equal space. So I'd like to say, David's talk as well with regard to imperceptibility, that is in a way finding that place that belongs to the whole, becoming imperceptible by merging with the whole, with the environment, so that one finds the vantage for safety for oneself, but for safety for the world, to be able to act in a new way, to be able to create that new ontology, to open oneself to those interstices from which the voices that have been denied can come back. See? So I think from all these points of view, I wanted to note, even what Mia was saying about Bakhtin, to go back in a way and look at a forerunner of Bakhtin. And I would say Nietzsche, from a certain point of view, is that forerunner. Nietzsche spoke about perspectives. And perspectives, he was not merely talking about many perspectives existing in the world, what he calls perspectivism. But he was saying we ourselves, each individual, is made up of multiple perspectives. And we create a compromise in ourselves because the world is feeding us with certain dominant visions of perspectives. And these perspectives become the dominant visions of our self-identity. On the other hand, Nietzsche was saying that if we can actually hold difference within ourselves, if we can observe these perspectives so that they each have the place that they want to have, we become a polyphony in that sense. He doesn't use that word polyphony, but we become a polyphony. And Nietzsche's notion of the post-human, in a way, the post-human as the being of the future, goes back to people like Nietzsche, and in, say, Anshul's presentation goes forward to people like Sri Aurobindo. And they're both utilizing this notion of the post-human as a enhanced capacity, a human capacity that has overgrown, that has grown beyond its accepted limits. And to move in that direction, in Nietzsche's case, he was saying to hold difference in oneself, to become as wide as the universe in its diversity, is a mark of the overhuman. That is the overhuman. One does not need to reconcile differences. One needs to see their importance. And one needs to hold them in a way that something decides what is the best thing to be done at a certain moment. What is the best perspective to actually address a certain moment in this polyphony that creates the harmony of the future? So I think, it's a very interesting session. So many questions were raised, so many perspectives and views of the future were raised. I hope we can take these with us for future research. And I think we've gone beyond our time today, so I think we'll stop at this point. Thank you. To Jonathan.
Thanks, Debashish. Yes, fantastic. That was really really wonderfully put together in terms of drawing the larger picture from in which the talks are kind of situated in and drawing us towards. But yeah, why don't we stop for today and we'll continue tomorrow, same time. We have 4 speakers tomorrow, a little bit more time for group discussion at the end, possibly. But Stefan, who's here with us today, will be moderating. But thanks everybody, all the presenters, and we'll hopefully see you back tomorrow.
Thank you.